Hey folks, John McKechnie here. Thanks for joining us here on the live stream and on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Today is Wednesday, March 9th. We're bumping it up a day early this week in light of yesterday's big news across the NFL. Mario Puig and I are going to dive into all of that, plus our combine reactions and more here on today's show. Let's get it rolling. Welcome in to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. John McKechnie, as always, joined by Mario Puig. This podcast presented to you by our friends over at WinBet. Mario, we're into March. We are a little ways away from the league year officially starting, but in true NFL form, no one else can really have the spotlight, even when nothing else theoretically should be going on in the NFL. Tuesday, a couple of seismic items came across, and that's not even speaking on the Calvin Ridley mess from Monday. He must be very happy that he got a little bit out of the spotlight with everything that went down yesterday. Of course, I'm talking about Aaron Rodgers re-upping with the Packers. Finally, the drama is over there, at least for this year, and at least we think. And then, of course, the even more massive implication type of move was made between the Seattle Seahawks and the Denver Broncos, with the Broncos finally ponying up and getting to answer the question of how good can this team really be if they have an actual quarterback. They acquire Russell Wilson. And I think that the knee-jerk reaction across most of Twitter and everybody is that Seattle got kind of a light return. And I don't necessarily disagree with that in terms of like the players that they got back, but at the same time, with the draft capital that they were able to acquire from Denver, if you're looking down the road, this could be something that we look back on and be like, this was the impetus or the catalyst of a renaissance in Seattle, because it had started to become clear, I think, to both you and I over the last 16 months or so that the Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson era seemed to be coming to its close, and it ended with a pretty big thud this past season. So your thoughts on Russ making the move to Denver, what that means for them, and then, of course, what Seattle does now.
Well, I thought it was a fine return for the Seahawks. Like, I don't know how much more they could reasonably expect. I don't know if people think that Russell Wilson's going to play like another 6 years or something. I don't. I think he'll probably play like 3, something like that. I mean, he's going to be 34, so maybe like 5 years max. So the idea that like this is just giving the Broncos a decade of just completely removed quarterback questions or concerns is not something that I believe. So I also tend to believe that Russell Wilson's a little bit overrated. Like, he's clearly really good, but you sometimes struggle with some people to get them to understand that like there's a clear divide between Russell Wilson and guys like Justin Herbert, Mahomes, I would say Lamar Jackson, obviously Josh Allen, quite a bit better. I would say Kyler Murray at this point is probably better too. But here's the thing that specifically gets missed with Russell Wilson is that the pressure that he constantly seems to be under is sort of a necessary condition of his method. Like, he specifically ends up in so many of those situations. Not that it was all his fault in Seattle. I mean, they had some truly bad offensive lines too. But even when they would improve the pass blocking, you wouldn't really get much different results. And it's because Russell Wilson can't really, for whatever reason, attack the intermediate in the middle of the field that reliably. Like, when he does, it's usually because some kind of coverage got blown wide open, or the pass rush just kind of wasn't there, and he had a big throwing lane that he usually doesn't. But a lot of those times where he's ending up under pressure, there's a guy in the middle of the field, especially in like the intermediate middle of the field, who might have been open, and the defense might have kind of left him open because they committed that much more to stopping Metcalf and Lockett on the play in question. And in those situations, Russell Wilson would kind of just end up under pressure because he can't make the throw or couldn't see it, or I don't know what it was exactly. But the intermediate has always been an area he's struggled with, and I don't think that's really going to change. I don't think that's a schematic issue with the Seahawks or anything. So it's a big upgrade for the Broncos, of course, going from Drew Lock, Bridgewater to Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson is still very good, still much better than them. But he's also, I think, a few levels below Aaron Rodgers, because Rodgers can just strike everywhere. on the field. If the high-low aren't going, Rodgers can get going in the intermediate, and if Wilson is in that situation, I think he just kind of ends up taking a bunch of sacks. So I think 2 firsts, 2 seconds. Granted, the 5th-year option is coming up, but Noah Fant is a pretty substantial chip to be getting in that trade. Kind of brutal for Noah Fant's fantasy purposes, but he's done a good job in Denver, and he'll probably do even better job for his own part in Seattle. Like, he's probably still developing even now as a tight end, being an underclassman and kind of a little bit raw coming out of Iowa. So that's basically like 3 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks. Shelby Harris, I guess, can give you some reps. I don't know. I don't really feel strongly about him either way. The Drew Lock part, of course, is not really anything. But I think, if anything, I would much sooner say that the Seahawks kind of got away dodging a bullet, maybe taking this 1 year too far. Like, maybe they should have tried to do this last year, get a Justin Fields kind of player, something like that, instead of going into this draft with, they have that 9th overall pick, but what are you going to get? Kenny Pickett? Like, that's not really doing it for me. So they got a bunch of new resources, as a team, front office, to rebuild, like you were saying. But it's still it's more difficult to do now than last year. And I don't know, I guess, not that this is especially related to what I was just talking about, but Pete Carroll does not seem like he's the guy to get that rebuild going, even if they don't screw up their draft picks.
Right. I was going to kind of draw the parallel there, because, you were laying out that it might be a little bit oversold how much longer that Russ has as being a truly good starting NFL quarterback. If you look at Seattle, I really thought that among the coaches going into last year that, it's particularly if they struggled the way that Seattle did, that he'd be one of the guys, like an easy call for him to step away from the game, given how long that he's been in it. But yeah, now they're starting this rebuild, and a rebuild is always particularly crucial. It's in its first year of its first iteration, and if they make missteps with all this newfound ammo that they have and the glaring need that they have at quarterback now, and then they axe Pete Carroll after next season, that Seattle could be in kind of a quagmire here if they don't navigate this properly.
Yeah, if they take some quarterback who just clearly looks terrible this year, and if they otherwise don't spend their cap resources, their pick resources well, they could have to fire Carroll, because they should have already, basically. If they do it a year from now, there's no particular reason why they would do it then, if they haven't done it before. But presumably it has to happen eventually. And the results are not going to get better this year. So the idea that Carroll's just going to kind of inspire everyone to rally around him with a resurgent season, that's off the table. So they're going to have a bad year. And on the one hand, it's like, yeah, they should fire him. They should have fired him a while ago. But if you're going to let him coach this year and then fire him because he had a bad year, you might as well fire him now, because he's going to have a bad year. It's not going to be pretty in Seattle this year. That's the other thing too, is like they have a few of these picks now from this Russell Wilson trade, but they're pretty much bare in terms of team assets, aside from just like Metcalf. Lockett's already 30, I think. Rashad Penny's a free agent, so he might, if they do keep him, they're going to have to give him a raise. And as a non-competitive team, I don't really see what's in it for them, even as a Rashad Penny fan. So yeah, they're quickly approaching like Houston Texans level bad as a roster overall, and I guess it'll be interesting, to see if they keep doing a fire sale. If they move Metcalf, they could probably get 2 first rounders for him. If they move Lockett, they could probably get like I don't know, something, not a whole lot, but something. So they're however many good players they have this year, it's going to be, their production is going to go toward nothing. Like they're just not going to be competitive.
No, and then you look at and we'll get into the landscape with the Broncos here in a second too, but any sort of downward momentum that Seattle is in is going to be accelerated by the fact that they get 6 games against what we think are going to be very good teams next year, whether it's the Rams, the Niners, or if the Cardinals can get their act together as well. So that this could be, I saw that, Grown, it's fair. But I still think that the Cardinals are better than what the Seahawks have right now
Oh,
at
for
the
sure,
very
yeah.
least. The Cardinals can find a way to lose to anyone. The Cardinals
Cardinals
can.
got talent. They just have no brains.
Yeah, exactly. So, cool way to be. But regardless, I think that this could get really, really tough for Seattle in a hurry. And like you said, it'll be interesting to see what other moves come because, we saw Bobby Wagner get released late last night. Yeah, I could certainly see one
They
of
might
Lockett or
lose that
Metcalf
safety in
moving.
free agency. They got no corners really.
But at least they're paying Jamal Adams a lot. So
They are paying him quite a bit. Yeah, and I don't know. Carlos Dunlap, I guess, is still there, but he should walk. If I don't know if he's under contract, they should trade him if he is. Otherwise, they should let him walk. Yeah, it's gonna be brutal. I don't know if they do draft a quarterback, they might just put Drew Lock out there as the human shield all year and just pray that he does enough for someone to offer a fourth rounder after the season or something.
yeah, that would make sense. They need to get at least a little something out of Drew Lock. You would think if he's included in such a blockbuster deal. But let's get on over to the Denver side of this one because obviously everyone is going nuts about Denver. But even prior to this move, the Broncos Super Bowl odds were kind of artificially inflated, kind of under the assumption that they would make a move for a quarterback. I think most people thought it was going to be Aaron Rodgers, but hey, it's Russell Wilson. Could be worse as far as the compensation there. Again, it's a absolutely loaded skill group, and now Noah Fant is out of the picture, so it's a little bit less muddy at the tight end spot. Alberto Bunum, I think a lot of people are expecting a lot of helium from him. We'll get to him in a second, but obviously you still have Jerry Judy, Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, running stacked running back room with Melvin
KJ
Gordon,
Hamler.
KJ Hamler. Yeah, that's right. Didn't mean to leave him off there, and Javonte Williams. So I mean, there's a lot of pieces there, and we know the defense was good last year, even with the offense kind of scuffling to the point where it put the defense in tough spots here and there. Now we kind of have the runway clear as far as Denver being able to get the full use out of these skill guys, and that of course is of particular interest to us for fantasy.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about Jerry Judy just because he is very good in that part of the field where Russell Wilson really isn't very good. Uh, I do think Jerry Judy can line up outside, though. I don't worry about him against outside corners or anything. And so he might be fine there because the further away from the middle of the field you get Wilson, assuming you're not just throwing far downfield, you'd want to get him toward the sideline, get him away from the middle of the field. And I think Judy can definitely do that, like Deontay Johnson kind of thing, playing outside receivers. Like even if he's not running past the corner on fly routes, he can be really tough, especially if he's not getting the number one corner on the opposing team. Cortland Sutton projects very well, and I guess Hamler would, or he does on a per snap basis. I don't think we can expect him to play more than like 500 snaps though, especially with Patrick there. But Cortland Sutton, I think especially stands to benefit. It's easy enough to make the DK Metcalf comparison with him. He's not that kind of burner, but he might be better at just kind of wide receiver stuff. Like he might be a little better at doing the boxing out rebound drill kind of thing on the sideline. So yeah, he's not going to just run past everybody the way Metcalf did sometimes, but I could see Sutton having, better year even than his breakout season a couple of years ago, I guess.
Yeah, so this really sets up nicely for him. That's an interesting point on Judy. Yeah, I mean he barely played on the outside last year. 337 snaps out of the slot as opposed to just 63 on the outside, and his A dot, as you would imagine, suffered a pretty significant bit. He was 13.8 as a rookie. I don't know if that's necessarily optimal way of using him, but I also don't think that 9.9
those are kind of
the way
like
it was a year
Calvin
ago.
Ridley, not to bring up a bummer subject, but I remember like Calvin Ridley having pretty much the same frame and having that sort of like 13 plus depth of target that which is not typical of guys with their relatively modest speed. And the reason it works is because they're such good route runners that they can just, dice up guys when they have time to run 10 plus yards, they can just kind of, be impossible to cover after a certain amount of time. So I do think Judy can play that, but I don't think he can play the Tyler Lockett role, which is very specifically like running posts like seam stretching routes. Lockett's a 4-4 flat guy, if I remember right, and Judy's whatever the 4-4, 6, 4-4-8 or whatever. And about the same weight, if I remember. I guess he was a little heavier, but in any case, Lockett was always, even at Kansas State, really good at threatening downfield. And Judy, he might be able to do it, but he's like a little less speedy. He's a little less able to just dart through a gap in a defense, and he's too skinny to be like taking hits. So if anybody's getting a finger on him, he might get lit up. I almost wonder if they'd be better off having Albert Okwuegbunam running the Tyler Lockett routes, just because he's actually faster than probably about as fast as Judy at 65 pounds heavier. And at 6'5", he could do basically Mark Andrews stuff and just be like a little less skilled as a receiver, but a lot faster. And that could be pretty explosive. Him doing 15-yard post routes, hitting top speed, being as big as he is, running at some safety. Who what are they going to do flat-footed in that situation?
No, exactly. So that there's obviously going to be a big bump as far as Okwuegbunam's ADP. I'm kind of at the point where I'm going to pay the new price, and I don't really care.
I'm pretty intrigued. I mean, I've considered myself an Albert Okwuegbunam truther all this time, so I'm almost surprised that I'm not more, excited about this. But I think it's because I went straight to the I'm afraid, the paranoid like jinxing phase of things when it looks like something good that you want is actually might happen, and you're like, well, how could that be? Like nothing good ever happens.
No way.
Why would I let myself get my hopes up about this? But in theory, it should work very well. Like there's reason to believe Albert Okwuegbunam is just good on his own part, and there's reason to believe that again those Lockett routes they might mostly go to him because he's their best means of stretching the field out of their base formation. If KJ Hamler's on the bench, Albert Okwuegbunam is their best big play threat down the field, which is crazy, but it's true.
There you go. So excited to see where this develops and how the market reacts to him. One last thing on the other side of that, with Noah Fant, are you pretty much out in redraft?
We'll see about the price. I mean, we'll see about the price with Albert O too. I mean, if he's going in God, I don't know. I don't know where he's going to go up to. Like if he's going in the 9th round, 8th round, I'll probably dive in at that point. But if he's going like 5th, maybe not. Fant, he's going to have to be cheaper. He's going to have to be like, 12th round kind of thing. But
I think he's like where like Higbee goes or something like that. Or
yeah, and if he's cheap enough, and especially if it's PPR and we don't care so much that he's on a team that won't throw any touchdowns, then especially he could be kind of interesting because they're going to probably have a bunch of garbage time too. Like he could catch a lot of passes, even if it's just kind of like they're getting, their asses beat every day.
You're and specifically like if one of Metcalf or Lockett is on the move too, that would theoretically open
particularly then, yeah.
Targets.
And in the meantime, I think Fant's their only like middle of the field underneath guy as it is because Lockett, I mean, he's a small slot type receiver, but he's a downfield player fundamentally. It's like DK Metcalf can do some intermediate stuff too, but Fant might be the guy who gets all the checkdowns and things like that.
Yep. So, this could, if the ADP settles in the right spot, then Fant could certainly be that PPR value, especially if you don't go for one of those, top end tight ends with your roster build. Let's go over to Green Bay. There's not a ton to unpack there. It's just a more confirmation that we're going to have a little bit more of the same. We're gonna run it back once again with Rodgers and Devontae Adams.
The last dance again.
Yeah. Last Dance Part 2. So I don't know. Your thoughts there? Are you surprised that Rodgers ended
I am
back
surprised.
Up in Green Bay?
It sounded like things were turning for the worse out of there. Like it sounded like Rodgers and Devontae Adams were maybe conspiring to set contract demands that they knew the Packers couldn't meet. But maybe they tried, and the Packers were just, I don't know if that $50 million thing is nonsense. I didn't follow up on that one. Don't really care that much. But yeah, maybe the Packers actually were just like, oh, we can meet that price, whatever price they named, and Rodgers just kind of had to go, okay, well, okay, I guess I'll stay here then. Even if he had a whole, parachute to Denver thing lined up, maybe he had to just wave it off when the Packers offered him the number. So everything should stay the same there. Don't know what would change.
I don't either. I guess with the Adams return, not that if Adams left that there would have been like a ton of helium for your MVS or your Lazard types, but any of that pent up hope I suppose goes away because I think the Packers play the style that they're going to play as long as Rodgers and Adams are there.
Yeah, Alan Lazard is a restricted free agent. I assume they're going to put a second round tender on him. Even he's an undrafted guy, so if they do the original round, they'll just lose him if they don't match the price or whatever. Valdez-Scantling, I think, is an unrestricted free agent, and it'll be interesting to see if these new expenses keep Green Bay from bringing them both back, or if they decide to just go with one. But they should be careful if they do let Valdez-Scantling walk. They should be careful about getting some more speed on the field because he's kind of inconsistent, obviously, and one-dimensional, but the safeties do have to pay attention to him when he's on the field.
Well, if there's one thing we know about this Green Bay Packers regime, it's they will always try to go get weapons to please Aaron Rodgers through the draft.
Yes, starting in the late third, we'll consider it.
Yeah, who's this year's Josiah DeGuara? Many are
wondering.
Oh my
God, that was such that pick and the Jay Sternberger picks were almost better reasons for Rodgers to throw a fit than the Jordan Love thing, and the Jordan Love thing was insanely stupid, obviously.
So, reaching new levels there. But
they took Jay Sternberger over Terry McLaurin and DeGuara over who knows what. Somebody who isn't a fullback. Anyway,
little bit, making it harder than it needed to be. Before we jump on over to our combine reactions, and we're going to get into a bit of our staff rookie mock, our mock 2.0. We got through the first one in February before the combine, of course. We're into the beginning of the third round of the rookie draft just now, so we'll get to that in a second here. But first, word from our friends over at Blue Wire and a message from our friends over at WynnBET. WynnBET is now the exclusive sponsor for RotoWire's fantasy podcast. WynnBET brings you all the latest action with a user-friendly interface, moneyline bets, boosted parlays, over-unders, round robins, live betting, and so much more at your fingertips. Want a break from sports betting? Head into WynnBET's digital casino and take a spin on roulette, double down in blackjack, slam the slots, or try your hand at Baccarat. WynnBET is currently available in 9 states. That's Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Louisiana, Michigan, New Jersey, New York, Tennessee, and Virginia, while rapidly expanding. At WynnBET, the possibilities are limitless. Register for WynnBET today, make a qualifying deposit, and wager to receive $200 in free bets. Promotion may vary by state. Download WynnBET now. That's WYNNBET. WynnBET, the exclusive partner for RotoWire's fantasy podcast. So, let's break things down. A lot of things happened in Indianapolis last week. We had a group of receivers that I think exceeded the already lofty expectations. There were a couple guys that lagged behind. I think the consensus going in was, Drake London or Treylon Burks was some iteration of 1-2 in most people's rankings. London, of course, was unable to go through the workouts, still getting back to 100% from his season-ending ankle injury. And Treylon Burks, I thought he was fine.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people were kind of under the assumption that he was going to crush it. And I mean, we talked about it. Like, it certainly seemed possible given the film, given the explosive production. It's like, oh, yeah, now if he does, the top end of what we think he can do, then, he really stamps down that number one spot among receivers. But now I think it becomes a much more open discussion after him, just kind of going replacement level-ish, or I don't know if I'm using the right word or phrase there to describe his performance. And then London, of course, standing put for the time being, while all these other guys kind of ascended with incredible workouts one way or the other. So where do you want to start? Do you still have some version of London Burks as your 1-2, and where does it go from there after seeing how everyone worked out in Indy?
So I had Treylon Burks ranked kind of as just kind of like the default, just because everything's so preliminary back before the combine. I don't even bother thinking about it too much beyond whatever I think about the production. and the rumored workout metrics, the stated height, weights, whatever. So with Burks, part of the calculus all along was there were these rumors about him running like a low 4.4, a high 4.3, something like that. And when you take that profile, that prospect profile, along with the production that he had at Arkansas, it very specifically comes out to an AJ Brown kind of comparison. Now, that's off the table at this point. He could still be plenty fast. He could still reach, he could still do better in the GPS speed test than the 40-yard dash. I don't know. There's that possibility too. But the possibility of him being a potential AJ Brown is off the table. And now you still have a totally good player profile, but you don't have such reason to expect a top range outcome. So for me, what basically happened with the combine was I went in having a top tier at receiver, a tier 1 of Treylon Burks, Drake London, and Jameson Williams. Now I'm just saying that tier 1 is gone, and like it's been eaten, or it's been absorbed by tier 2, and now that's just one big ambiguous top tier now with Burks and London still toward the top of it, along with Jameson Williams, but without any implied safety from that group of competition.
Right, because guys like both Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, but both did extremely well for themselves running the sub 4.4s. Among the kind of sleepers that did well for themselves, I don't know if this vaults him into your first tier, but I'm certain it puts him on your radar. But what do we make of Christian Watson? Now out of North Dakota State. I mean, a guy who's 6'4", 208, had the best broad jump of any receiver at the combine, runs a 4.36 at that size. I mean, those are some pretty, freaky tools to be working with.
Yeah, he seems good. The one thing about him is, well, I guess there's a couple things to keep in mind. Obviously, the workout numbers are very good. However, his production at North Dakota State was not great. It was good, but he was basically just a downfield specialist guy, and I don't think he took up like all that much of a share of their yardage even. Like there was some other player who was pretty good for them, and Watson didn't like blow him away. And he's pretty much always doing that 20 yards a catch kind of thing. Like I don't know if they really had him doing much more than chasing bombs downfield in an otherwise run-heavy offense. The other thing to keep in mind is he's pretty skinny, so it's good to have those numbers, obviously, but if he's like 6'4", 220 instead of 6'4", 208 or whatever, maybe that's a 4.47 40 instead of a 4.37 or whatever. And so if his selling point is his speed, he's probably not going to add that weight. If he's not going to add that weight, he's always going to be kind of skinny, and that's just probably going to limit some of the things that he does, make him more of like a deep ball or bust kind of player in the NFL, and not necessarily like one that's so great in traffic. He might need to kind of just run past people to make his big plays, and we can expect him to do that. We can expect him to run past these corners every so often, but he might not be able to do much else, and so he might never be like a volume receiver. Like Drake London came in at 6'4", 219, I think, and even him, that's a little bit of a skinny side of a build at 6'4". So Watson's quite a bit lighter, yet he needs that speed. Like if it's good that he has it, but if he didn't have it, he'd be in trouble.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's an interesting point you're making regarding, like
I think he's like a better Valdez-Scantling.
Okay, all right. That's a viable comp, and if there's more to his game than what MVS has, then that's certainly totally interesting, decent, and he can get himself off the ground too. I mean, both those jumps were elite relative to this class. I mean, and when you're already 6'4" and you're up that high, like you're going to be tough to stop in the red zone, at least in theory. So he went. Let's see here. He went fairly early in our rookie draft. He went with the second pick of the second round. He was the seventh receiver off the board. And before we unpack
I'm gonna have to put this computer down in a second. My dog got herself stuck in the window, and I gotta pick her down here.
Okay, all right. Well, while Mario dons his fireman apparel to help out Dulce, the dog, I will continue to recap our rookie draft. So, leading things off, same as the first time around, Joe Bartle took with the first overall pick Breece Hall. Malik Willis went second off the board, so that's a bit of a change in tune from where our first mock went. Drake London was next at 3, and then I took Garrett Wilson at 4, so the second receiver off the board. You back, Mario?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
am. The dog's out of the window ledge, and I'm back in my beanbag chair,
phenomenal.
ready to
Okay,
be professional again.
so I was just breaking down the first couple of picks from the rookie draft. And I guess the notable one that I wanted to pick your brain on was in the first one of these back in February. I took Treylon Burks as the first receiver off the board and one of the first picks overall. I took him second overall. In fact, this time I had the fourth pick, and I took Garrett Wilson over Treylon Burks. So, any thoughts on where you would have Wilson relative to Burks now after the last week?
Yeah, so with that first tier that I had, basically dissolving, a guy like Wilson is among the group who stands to benefit from that. Like I had him and Chris Olave and I don't know, maybe Dotson. I can't remember. Dotson, like
Pickens?
Ross and some those guys all in the second tier. So this moves up Wilson into that group where I don't really have a specific order in mind personally, but because he's in that tier, he's basically like a defensible first pick among the receivers. Just because it might be one of those years where the best one isn't that much better than the sixth best one, and whatever way it turns, like we're not going to be able to foresee it. Like we can't know enough about what these guys are going to be getting into in the next couple of years to know how it's going to shake out. So it makes sense to take a lot of them first overall, and him included, I think.
Yeah, I thought so as well. I mean, Wilson resetting on his numbers. So I mean, at 6 foot or just a hair under 183. So not a big frame for him, but runs the 4.38. Kind of mid or unimpressive in the shuttle. Most receivers opted just simply not to, and then kind of average.
It's a screwed up category now. It's like you can't look at it.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, most people are just kind of eschewing those agility drills among the receivers. I was disappointed. I was entering in our combine data, and you can check out the combine data at rotowire.com/football. And if you go to stats, you can pull up the NFL combine and draft stats and pro day stats. I'm sorry. You can check all that out. We have data going all the way back to 2005. So if you find a player with a frame of a certain type, you can filter it in there, see other historical examples, and kind of pinpoint or maybe just kind of put a ballpark on where exactly you might be able to expect this guy to translate at the next level. It's not the cleanest, of course. There's obviously more that goes into it, but can at least get a little bit granular as far as workout metrics, frame, that type of thing. So do check that out. RotoWire.com/football/draft-workout. Check that out. But yeah, when I was entering the offensive lineman, my main point, not enough of them were benching. What's up with that? I need the big boys to be chucking lead around.
Yeah, they I guess I can't make some of the references that I want to right now, but they have become too soft and finesse, French like whatever they would say. But yeah, it seems like it's a really good class. I still expect that North Carolina State one to go first overall, even though they've franchise tagged Cam Robinson. Guess we'll see how that all goes. Good group, I think, to be serious, even though they are soft and lack resolve.
Yes. So, but
in character, probably even more so.
I mean, the bench truly just does measure character. It's all about your chest. But no, I mean, yeah, when it comes to the Jaguars, what's the problem with having two extremely good tackles? I mean, I wouldn't say that Cam Robinson's extremely good, but
yeah. I guess the other thing is I forgot what the hell is going on with Juwan Taylor. Is he at guard now? I guess I totally forgot. I know they have Walker Little. Anyway, I'm sure they'll blow it, whoever they take.
the Jags,
whoever they take is the wrong answer. That's how we know what the right answer is.
Getting Anyway, I digress. So let's get into, I guess, a couple other receivers that were not in your first tier, not even in your first tier, two tiers, that you thought did well last week, and maybe one or two guys that fell as a result of last week. I'm sure David Bell fits that mold, unfortunately.
Yeah, so going into the combine, what I said about this receiver class, and this turned out to be already wrong, I think, was that it was really strong at the top, but didn't have much depth. And I think not only did the top not turn out to be as strong as we had hoped, it's still fine, but it's just there's no one that you're going to confuse for one of the top guys of the last two drafts, basically.
Right.
It's improved its depth quite a bit, though, and uh, not to say that it's all like role player guys. It's not just part-time guys, more part-time receivers stepping up. There's players like I guess he was conventionally expected to do pretty well, but Sky Moore from Western Michigan, it's like he's 5'10", 195, has the 4.41, super productive at Western Michigan. The one year he took a backseat to D. Eskridge. D. Eskridge was already like 24 years old, so it's like, especially with Sky Moore being a true sophomore at the time, like there's nothing wrong with that. And then also he was pretty much holding serve along with Jaden Reed or whatever that Michigan State receiver's name is.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be an NFL receiver. So Moore held up and maybe even set the standard of production next to two other NFL receivers, had that 4.41. So that moves him into, I think, like viable top 40 pick range. Because he's big, he was productive, he's fast. There's not really much more to think about, in my opinion. The other one, and this one is a little more surprising, or at least to me, Khalil Shakir from Boise State had a really good combine. He's still skinny. He's not like a great athlete or anything, but he did show he's a good athlete, and that was not a given. Sometimes those small school guys, they have great numbers, especially slot type receivers, which Shakir was largely a slot receiver at Boise State. Sometimes they put up huge numbers, and they still don't really do anything in the NFL because they're just kind of like too skinny and slow. And Shakir showed that that's not going to be his story. He's ran the 4.43 at 196. So that basically gives him the same kind of height, weight, athleticism traits as someone like Robert Woods, who incidentally his game looks a lot like. And yeah, his production at Boise State was just awesome. So now that he has totally good, workout, totally satisfactory, I guess I should say, workout numbers to go with it, I see absolutely no reason to think that Shakir isn't a good starting receiver in the NFL. And I thought it was possible before, but I didn't think it was anything more than that. Now I think it's likely.
Yeah, I saw your tweet shortly before we jumped on here, where there's cases to be made for him being, like you said, a top 40 pick at the very least, and yeah, the production was pretty automatic from the time he was a sophomore onward. Would have had 2,000-yard seasons if not for the COVID shortened 2020 season where Boise State played just 7 games, but he was going well over 100 yards per game that season as well, and then obviously went over 1,000 yards this past year. Yeah, so the production's never been a problem, and it was good for him to kind of stamp that athleticism there in Indianapolis. I wanted
But
to
yeah,
get your
sorry, I was just going to say some guys in the actual mid rounds who stepped up, I guess, would be Melton from Rutgers, who
your
I still can't
guy.
believe
We're
he was
Rutgers
given a
guys.
4.34. I mean, his production doesn't look that good
No.
because it was in the Rutgers offense, and when
Mm-hmm.
you adjust or when you weigh his production against the fact that he was playing in that offense where they completed like 48% of their passes for 4.5 yards per pass, that will never happen again. There will never be a passing offense that bad ever again. The world will blow up before it can happen again. And Melton had to play with that nonsense. So yeah, the 4.34 was really good for him. Vilas Jones, I don't think is anything more than like a field stretching mid volume kind of receiver, but a 4.3 140 at over 200 pounds, and he was pretty good at Tennessee this last year. So I don't think he'll ever be like a target monster, but he is now in that like round 3-4 conversation where I didn't have him previously.
Yeah, I think he torched Georgia. I think he had like 200 yards against Georgia.
Yeah, so he's weird because he basically couldn't get on the field, or maybe he kept getting hurt, I don't know, at USC, and then he went to Tennessee and still didn't even really play that much. Like he was basically back up to Josh Palmer, at least in the rotation for targets he was. So yeah, but having the 4.31 speed, it's like, on the one hand, you would say in a case like his, a guy who doesn't really break out until late with a huge age advantage, you would say he's not very skilled at playing receiver. Like, receiver tasks don't come naturally to him the way it does Khalil Shakir. But when you are 4.31 fast over 200 pounds, you can be less skilled than the next guy, with the same amount of skill as you, but only running the 4.4. So he's got that ability to make the safeties pay attention, and that could get him snaps, even if he'll never be more than like an 80 target receiver or whatever.
Right, but at least, like you said, now he's very much in the discussion, because those were legitimate marks against him. The way that he didn't play much at USC, the way that 2020 didn't go great his first year at Tennessee, but Tennessee really just a super reinvigorated offense this past year under Josh Heupel, a lot more up tempo. Really one of the better offenses in the SEC, and he was a huge reason why. So for him to test as well as he did, definitely arrow trending upwards. Your thoughts on Alec Pierce? I went ahead and scooped him in the second round, the fourth pick of the second round, wide receiver 9. So right before him, Sky Moore, Christian Watson, George Pickens, and then I went ahead and grabbed Alec Pierce, the 6'3" receiver out of Cincinnati, ran a 4.41, had a 40.5-inch vertical and a 129-inch broad jump as well at the combine.
Yeah, he's pretty interesting, and he was in that sort of like mid-round conversation before, but we didn't know for sure how well he was going to test, and we couldn't really take for granted that he would be a mid-round option. But with a 4.41, the 40-inch vertical at 6'3", 211, and definitely also relevant. He had totally good production at Cincinnati for the past 3 years. That's definitely the profile of a player that I think you can justify a day 2 pick on. And he ends up for me in that same genre. I guess he's just kind of like a better version of the same genre of prospect that Vilas Jones is, because like Vilas Jones, Alec Pierce probably won't be a high target volume receiver. Like, he's probably going to be a downfield oriented player who makes, if he'll be like efficient with his production. Like, if he's only an 80 target player, he might get you 800 yards every time. But I don't know if he's going to be able to go up to like 120 targets without seeing his efficiency fall off. Basically because to juice that target count, you're just going to have to throw different types of passes to him. Like, you've already maxed out his, play action, post fly route bombs. There's only so many of those you can set up in an offense. And to get his target count over 80 or whatever, he's going to start needing to make some 5-yard slants, things like that. And I don't know if he'll ever make those plays, but it's possible. Some of his limited volume might have been like the structure of the Cincinnati offense. It was very run heavy, and it wasn't really trying to drive up his target count that much. And having the 4.41 speed is definitely encouraging too. So if a team is prepared to kind of like not put too much on him, I think he could be effective right away in like a 400, 500 snap kind of role.
So just filtering, use the tools again on the RotoWire site to look at the historical comparisons, of guys, receivers that are 6'3" and between 210 and 215. Pierce does have the best 40 of the guys that actually put down 40s. A couple of interesting names here. So, some old college football greats, Kieris Garrett and Robert Davis, of course. But if you look a little further down, you do have guys like Brian Edwards and Eric Decker of a similar type of build at the very least.
Yeah, Decker was a target monster in college, but Pierce probably has. Sorry, who's the second one right before Decker?
Brian Edwards.
Yeah, so he's definitely faster than Edwards. So he should, like, for instance, if he was playing in that Brian Edwards role last year, he would have done more with it, because unlike Edwards, Pierce is actually fast enough to run 15 yards downfield on his routes. So yeah, if that's the kind of range that he's coming out to, I guess you could imagine ways that he could be, in certain roles productive even as a rookie.
Yep. So I'm hopeful. Obviously, it was kind of a strange sticking point. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go receiver there or if I wanted to dip into the running back pool further, but I opted not to. I think I'll circle back and get some more running backs here a little bit later on. And speaking of, the running backs have been pushed up in result of the combine. Breece Hall, like I said, unsurprisingly cemented himself as the RB1, and I think
I was a little surprised, man. He's got like everything. I mean, he's not huge. That's the only thing. If he was over 220 pounds, I'd be like, dang, he's almost like, getting into that Jonathan Taylor kind of territory. But instead, he is merely, I think, projecting as like a safe top 8 NFL running back.
Yeah, I meant he did test better than I think both of us were expecting. I wasn't surprised that he left Indianapolis as the RB1. But yeah, really good numbers from him at the combine. And then we'll take a look at, let's see here, Kenneth Walker, kind of seeming to settle in as the RB2 officially. I think both of us were a little bit curious to see what the actual long speed looked like relative to his future NFL peers, but he runs the sub 4.4. That was better than I expected by a pretty decent margin.
I gotta say though, the running back times I think are all wrong, and specifically they lowered all of them. You know how they changed the receiver ones. Alec Pierce, they didn't change until like 3 a.m. from a 4.33 to a 4.41. So they screwed up the 40s with the receivers and the tight ends. And then during the running back day, before they said it was a 4.38, every single player I think at running back had it at least like 0.02 and some 0.1. More generally, you would see like 0.1 improvement to their times. And in Kenneth Walker's case, it was originally reported as a 4.46. So instead of having the unofficial time adjusted to a higher time, which is how it happened with receivers in literally every other scenario of the combine history that I can remember, they said, here are the unofficial times. And then the official ones were all way faster and just very fast in general. Like, this is one of the fastest running back classes ever, you would have to conclude based on the combine, but it definitely isn't. Like, it's just, there's a bunch of like Brian Robinson had like a 4.65 or something, and then it says 5.42 now, or sorry, 4.52 now. Kyron Williams went from a 4.72 to a 4.65. These guys are not as fast as their 40 times. And that includes Breece Hall, who went like from a 4.44, I think, to a 4.39 or whatever. And it's like the 4.44 is already very good. In the Walker case, the 4.46 would be a rung lower than a 4.38. There's a meaningful difference there. And he's 211 pounds, not 217 or whatever Hall was. So for me, Kenneth Walker, he could totally have some good NFL seasons in him. And I think he's clearly the running back too in this rather weak class. But for me, the comparison for him is someone like Julius Jones or somebody like that we basically won't remember in 10 years, but might have enough juice to have some big games.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I do remember Julius Jones, brother of Thomas Jones.
Yep. Yeah.
That's right. Look at that. Pretty good. Elsewhere, sticking on Rutgers, Isaiah Pacheco, their running back, tied for the best 40 in this class at his position. And then someone who I'm going to have to think very strongly about here with my next pick after Jeff Erickson makes his, Pierre Strong out of South Dakota State, because the production pretty insane for him. A 4-year player at South Dakota State. Had a bad junior year. I haven't looked into why exactly, or at least bad relative to his other seasons, but bounced back really strong as a senior. I think he averaged over 7 yards a carry or just at it for his entire career. So that's impressive when he didn't have like insane volume, but certainly enough to where keeping and sustaining that 7 yards per carry number and scoring tons of touchdowns on top of it, and then running the 4.37, you're like, okay, all right, I think that there's something real here.
Yeah, particularly in this rather weak running back class where the mid rounds are just entirely up for grabs. Like, no one knows what these, like, running backs 3 through 8, good luck guessing who they are. I think Strong could be that third running back. He could be the second running back off the board. I mean, I don't know what teams need to see from him for that to happen, but 4.37 at 207, I think it was 207 that he weighed in at. That's Also, he had one of the lowest adjustments to his time. So he's listed at a 4.37, and it's probably not right, but his original was only a 4.39. So he had tied for the fastest time and also had the least help getting to that number in the adjustments. So at worst, he's a 4.39 at 207. Elijah Mitchell ran a 4.35 at the Lafayette Pro Day last year at like 198 or 195 or something. And that might already be more like a 4.4 flat if it's on the combine track. So if Elijah Mitchell is 200 pounds, whatever, 4.4 flat, then Pierre Strong with a 4.39 at 207 is basically in that same category of athlete. So he was otherwise productive at South Dakota State. Sometimes there's things that don't show up between those two considerations, but as far as they go, he's got a totally clean profile.
Yep, I'm into it. So if Jeff isn't watching, hopefully, maybe he'll catch the recorded version later on. But I think I've just talked myself into scooping him with my next pick potentially. What did you think of Zamir White? I thought that he exceeded my expectations. I was expecting a somewhere in the 4.5s for the 40, and didn't see like the impressive jumps coming either.
Yeah, I don't really believe his 40 time, but he's pretty well built and his production is convincing as a runner. I guess with him, a guy like him, I kind of worry that he's basically just like a Chris Ivory kind of player, like guy who's pretty explosive, pretty well built, and runs really hard, is really tough to tackle, runs over people, stuff like that, but ultimately kind of like wears himself out doing it. And doesn't have necessarily like a diversified skill set. We'll see.
Yeah, his type is kind of getting extinct a little bit.
Yeah, he did better, and he's grading better for me than I expected to grade him. But and so he's basically a better depth option at the least than I gave him credit for, and it's worth keeping in mind because if he goes to some team in the 4th round and their starter gets hurt, he could easily be productive. I mean, it's guessing the opportunity that's difficult with these guys because there's even in this relatively weak class, there's probably like 8-10 running backs we could say like, he'd have a shot if somebody gave him the ball, he'd have a shot. So he's in that group, even though he's not at like the top of my list exactly. I am higher on Pacheco, who he surprised me quite a bit. I did not expect to like him, but with testing like that and the fact that he's pretty high motor guy with I think he has a good pass catching background there. Not as good as Blackshear or whatever his name was, but still pretty good. So yeah, Pacheco could get surprisingly high in my rankings just because his brutal rushing averages were pretty clearly just the result of the Rutgers offense. Like he's playing in those 47% completed, 4.5 yards per pass offense, which is like it's like a crime that Rutgers offense existed,
And obviously playing in arguably the hardest division in college football, like that's a brutal draw for Rutgers, but like I'm not sure that they're lighting up the MAC.
Yeah, like he had no chance playing on that team. So he's got the motor, he's got the athleticism. That's sometimes all you need to get in that conversation of like viable NFL running back. It's definitely within his range of outcomes, I think.
Yeah, so he's definitely in the interesting pile now after last week. And then I want to end it on two guys who I'm kind of worried are more workout warrior than totally viable NFL options, but set the record on Calvin Austin out of Memphis, and Taekwon Thornton out of Baylor.
Believe it or not, I'm almost a little more interested in Thornton because he was one of those guys who kind of caught my attention for playing early at Baylor. Like I think he broke out as his true sophomore year.
Yep.
He was kind of like he was almost not like a 1B, but he was pretty close to the standard of play that Denzel Mims was setting at the time. But yeah, I had no idea how fast he was supposed to be. It was initially reported as a 4.21, which would have broke John Ross's 4.22, obviously. Got adjusted to a 4.28. He's very skinny and he has small hands. So I don't know what you can do with him exactly. Like he's probably not a high target volume player, but if you have something like that Marquez Valdes-Scantling role, I know I keep bringing him up, but it's like if you need someone to play like 600 snaps and pretty much just run posts and fly routes, and you don't care that he can't make tough catches over the middle, it's hard to see where Thornton falls short for you. Like he really is that fast. He really does get open quite a bit. He really does catch the ball, even though he has small hands. It's just we don't think he's going to hold up if he takes a hit when he's trying to make that catch, So that's a limitation there. But I do like Thornton. Calvin Austin, I'm lower on, both because he's like 5'8", 170. And by the way, at the Senior Bowl, he measured in at 5'7", 173. So I don't know if he got taller or the combine. I don't know if now with the combine, we have to worry about them getting heights wrong in addition to 40 times. So whatever it is, it's kind of obnoxious. If Calvin Austin is still growing at 23 years old, that's obnoxious. Should knock it off. But his production was not as clean as Taekwon Thornton's. Like Taekwon Thornton was always above the Baylor baseline. Like whatever the yards per target was with him was always higher than like the yards per attempt. And he was clearly lifting the team baseline. Calvin Austin, I don't think had an above baseline season with Memphis until this most recent season. And he was very good. But when you're that small and you're basically taking until your fifth year to start producing at a plus level, that's concerning for me, even if you are very fast, which he is. So maybe he's better than Jakeem Grant, but barely so, in my opinion, if so. And I'm not taking that for granted either.
No. So, yeah, the size is just going to be something that limits him to being like a strong wide receiver in a given offense, and someone who can make big plays, but I don't think that you can count on him reliably. Like he'll never come close to seeing, and rarely do NFL players get a 30% target share, but like if he's getting 10%, I feel
yeah, I would guess he'll be one of those guys who gets targeted heavily on his snaps, and when people are trying to find their next breakout player, they'll be like, look at his target rate, and it'll basically be because they're putting him out there with scripted plays because they know he can't block, and he will never play more snaps than whatever it was that he just played, and he'll never break out the way people say, like, if you just scale his target rate over 1,000 snaps, it's like, well, that'll never happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So important note there on target rates and the extrapolation thereof. Johannes has a question for us, and she must have been listening throughout these last couple of weeks. Thoughts on Kevin Harris? I swear that is not my alt account on YouTube.
John making burners to ask himself questions on a podcast. Yeah, I literally didn't even notice Kevin Harris, and I'm embarrassed about that until John mentioned it. And that's even with Kevin Harris having this season 2 years ago was it 3 years? He had that one season with over 1,000 yards and a really high rushing average, and being 220 pounds. That's very specifically like my whole type of running back right there, like high rushing average, 220 plus. Not that they truly need to, but like that's the prototype for me. So I'm surprised that I missed him, because normally when I look at a box score like that for a sophomore running back, I'm like, oh, I got to keep an eye on this guy. I somehow never learned of him until you mentioned it like 3 days ago, John. But yeah, I like Harris. He's right there in that like running back 3 conversation for me, even though no one's talking about him even like in the first 6 rounds. He's over 220, and he had the good jumps at the combine, didn't do a 40 for whatever reason. He doesn't need to do a great 40 if he's 220 and he's got good jumps, and he's producing the way he did at South Carolina. I know he had that one bad year this year, but he was dealing with injuries, and it seemed like there were a bunch of games too where it's just kind of like they got rocked, and that contaminated a small sample. And then by the end of the year, being more healthy, at least in that last game there, he got hot again and basically started putting up the same numbers that he did in that big season 2 years ago. So I try to think of things like, well, if this guy just had another season like the one 2 years ago, what would we think about him then? And the answer with Harris is we'd conclude he's probably quite good. And a season like that would have been totally possible if he played another year there. So Harris there's like a wide range of outcomes with him, but I think the upside is a lot higher than what's getting acknowledged right now.
Yeah, exactly. I think, if you were to flip those 2 seasons and he did what he did this year in 2020, what he this year, then he'd
be running back 3 after Kenneth Walker or something like that, and ahead of Spiller.
there's so much to be said for just like how kind of wide open this one is, or that this running back group is after Breece Hall.
There's
Really,
a lot of
even
specialists too. It's like it's not just James Cook. It's like I think Treston Ebner could be a totally surprising pass catcher in the NFL. Like he basically was a receiver that Baylor made play running back, and in the NFL, it's a lot easier to get a guy like him going. With an Eckler kind of role or something like that. Not saying he'll be as good as Eckler or even close. I just mean to say they don't ask him to get more than 8 carries, so it doesn't matter that he sucks at running between the tackles.
Right, exactly. Yeah, always liked Ebner's game. Really good in special teams as well. And then a guy who had a little bit of pre-combine hype. Do we need to write off Damian Pierce?
So his numbers didn't stand out, but that cuts both ways. Like they didn't really trip any red flags for me either.
Okay.
He is densely built, did a really good job as a pass catcher. So I'm still interested in him just because he fits into that just generously large category of like, could he be okay if he gets a chance? And I don't see any reason to say he would be bad. So I kind of have to, concede a spot for him, even though it's not really the top of my mind, really.
Got it. All right. Well, that certainly checks out. That's going to do it for us here on a loaded RotoWire fantasy football podcast. A lot of ground that we cover between the Russ trade, Aaron Rodgers, and a ton of incoming rookies following their performances at the Combine a week ago. For Mario Puig, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening to the RotoWire fantasy football podcast. Again, brought to you by our friends over at WinBet.
Try RotoWire today, free for 10 days. Get our premium tools, rankings, analysis, and breaking news alerts. No credit card required. Go to rotowire.com/